All right, guys. I don't know for you. My apologies. The previous videos, my screen was literally on the other side, and I think it blocked most of the shit we were reading. So hopefully you guys are cool right now, and let's continue. We got to chapter 5, requirements lifecycle management. I have no idea what this is, but we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do another 5.1. We're gonna do 5.0, then 5.1, and then see how we feel about it. Give ourselves some like maybe a couple of hours to kind of like consider what the fuck we read, and then from there we take steps forward. So the requirements lifecycle management knowledge area describes the tasks that business analysts perform in order to manage and maintain requirements and design information from inception to retirement. So this basically is going to define the tasks that we do that allow us basically to identify whatever, identify the requirements that are needed. So get it? Like we're doing something to see what we're going to be doing. Amazing, business analyst. These tasks describe establishing meaningful relationships between related requirements and designs. I love how they said meaningful relationships between related requirements and designs. Because you have to understand, like, there's a philosophy behind everything. Everything. Since everything is a concept, then your philosophy of approach is an expression of your style. And here, the requirements that are related, you establish a relationship with it. What do they mean by that? As in, you're gonna have to find a way to interact with the changes, the evolution, the movements in a harmonious way, in an effective way, in an efficient way, in a caring way, in a productive way. That is the relationship that you're creating with the related requirements and designs and the changes of the requirements and the designs when changes are proposed. So what we're doing they say create a relationship, the way I see it is what we're doing effectively is creating the dynamic over which these things that we're looking at are established within our mind frame, within our mindsets. And that allows us to always be kind of like, like a friend of yours, you can always, okay, so the difference between a friend and I'm going to use friend because that's the closest thing. The difference between a friend and a boss, like if you don't message the boss when he's expecting a phone call, I don't know, man, we might get fired, we might get yelled at, we might get lectured, all that shit. But if you don't message a friend, then you can always explain something to them. But if you message a boss, it's very professional and formal. So it kind of like you have to fulfill the formality. So if you miss on something, that means you're kind of gonna take the responsibility fully. But when it comes to a relationship, there's more of a dynamic. Like your friend might understand, he might know what you're going through, he might know what you have to do. And so establishing a relationship is closer to not having points that restrict us and that need to be done, but more like what are we doing regarding these points? And then evolving from there, allowing ourselves to kind of like engage through the relationship we built towards these requirements and these designs and these changes. We're not changing the entire thing, we're just changing the dynamic of our approach, which is why relationship is a good word to use here. So the purpose of requirements lifecycle management is to ensure that business stakeholder and solution requirements and designs are aligned to one another and that the solution implements them. It's funny because like any way you think about it, it's more like you're kind of like creating the path where everything moves on. And every single step you do, you kind of have like things onboarding on the path or moving on the side. Some things are directly in the center of the path, some things are on the outskirts of the path. But all of them are kind of aligning in a way to get to the direction. So your relationship with anything is basically the path that's there and how you're establishing it. And the movement basically is the dynamic, right? Because sometimes you move fast, sometimes you move slow. It involves a level of control over requirements and over how requirements will be implemented in the actual solution to be constructed and delivered. It also helps to ensure that business analysis information is available for future use. So that kind of like it's more like when you go for a long walk. I'm going to stick to this path thing. If you go for a long walk and somebody asks you how was the walk, and you can literally be like it was amazing, or you can be like, oh, we stopped at this place, and then we took a break at this place, and then we changed direction in this place, or we hydrated, or we ate, or we kind of like run in this on this space. So all of these are kind of like more detailed approach, more detailed explanation of your kind of like walk. And it's practically the same here because ultimately we have to kind of like be able to explain our dynamic and explain the reason why it actually was a valid dynamic, right? Like, why did we choose this dynamic, not this dynamic? Why did we choose to run here instead of walk? And all of this is the documentation. So the requirements life cycle begins with the representation of a business need as a requirement. Representation of a business need as a requirement. All right, we have to start with a requirement. So the business need is the requirement. Continues through the development of a solution and ends with a solution and the requirements that represent it are retired. So effectively what we do, we say like, what do we need? Okay, the requirements for this to be satisfied, amazing. Now that we find a solution, are the requirements satisfied? If they are satisfied, then finally there's no need anymore because we solved it. So the requirements retire. Or we iterate between them, like are the requirements, like are we, whatever we're actually doing in the solution, the development of the solution, is it feeding into the actual need and the requirement? If it works, then perfect. There's no need for the requirement to exist anymore. It's retired. You got what you wanted, you fulfilled your part, you existed so we can give you a solution. Fuck off. Or go rest. Excuse go rest. The management of requirements does not end once the solution is implemented. Look at that. Why did we tell it to fuck off earlier? Yeah, because it's not really about the solution, is it? Is implemented. Throughout the life of a solution, requirements continue to provide value. They are managed appropriately. So, so basically, like in representing a solution doesn't mean we fixed the problem because the solution itself, I talked about it. Yes, okay, I mentioned it earlier in my train of thought. Because the solution has to kind of have an iterative approach with the requirements. So the minute we have a solution doesn't mean we're done. The minute the requirements are finished, that means our solution succeeded. And the requirements continue to provide value when they are managed appropriately, of course. Within the requirements and life cycle management knowledge area, the concept of within the managed area that we're going to be studying right now, the requirements life cycle management knowledge area, which is basically this chapter, the concept of a life cycle is separate from a methodology of process. Okay. The methodology or process used to govern business analysis work. So here they're separating the concept of a life cycle because they called it requirement life cycle management. They're not looking at it as a process. And I wonder why. Life cycle refers to the existence of various phases or states that requirements pass through as part of a change. Life cycle refers to the existence of various phases or states. Yeah, so a process is consistently iterated upon and changing regardless of the stage you are in your actual solution creation or in the project, whatever it is. Because the processes, there are different processes for different things, and they're always kind of like changing and adapting. But a life cycle is more of like, what exists right now and what are we going to be working with or how are we going to be working with it. Requirements may be in multiple states at one time. True, maybe you have to work through different things and the solution, like maybe there's a testing stage somewhere happening and maybe there's like a research stage somewhere happening. Or maybe there's like a, I don't know, involvement stage somewhere happening, stakeholder stage somewhere happening. The states listed here are not intended to be a comprehensive listing. Okay, so like naturally, like every, as always, they always give us something and then basically just say fuck off. So here, this chart, if anyone doesn't know what this chart is, or I forgot the name, but I'll search for it in a bit. Anyways, the life cycle management is assessment, approval, consensus, and basically train, maintain, managing. So in the assessment part, all you have to do is kind of like create some form of plan, have some form of opinion, and if it's brought forward, I forgot the name of this chart. This kind of charting, graphing. This is mind mapping. Ways to draw mind maps. Internet is off. Great. So bring forward yes. If it's a yes, the assessment is a yes. Then we approve it and confirm. Like, get consensus on top of it. If it's a no, you check for the potential requirements and what it is that actually could be, or what it is that's actually like. You reassess the assessment based on the requirements. So you kind of shoot something and you iterate in comparison to what you think you might get until you get final approval. And when you get final approval, you take it a step forward. And if you take it a step forward and it's approved, then you end up like managing it. So you trace the actual like requirement, you maintain it, and you prioritize it. You really have to think about a requirement. Like every solution might have like five, six, no, every need might have five, six requirements, or might have 100, or might have just one. And so every requirement kind of has to be, some of them are very prevalent or necessary, for example, but maybe at the beginning stages. And as you're assessing the requirements within its own life cycle, maybe you assumed it will die at the solution stage, but it ends up having to be retired earlier because it served its purpose. And ultimately, because the first time you look at a problem, a need, and you're thinking, oh, what do we need for it? You might need five, six things, but they're not really like horizontally like on the same level. Maybe some things are need to be done first, and then basically like they contribute to something bigger, right? Like if you want to build a car, then you have to get an engine, and you have to get like a tire, and you have to get whatever it is. But to build an engine, you need fuel, you need like gas, you need screws. And so basically there are multiple things that multiple requirements for you to get the engine done, and multiple requirements to get the whole car done, and multiple requirements to get the wheel done. Like to fix a wheel, you need like three requirements, which are the screws and the actual like tires and the chrome thing. I don't know, I forgot what they call it, but the steel thing that the actual wheel of the car kind of like sticks to. So if you think of requirements this way, then ultimately some requirements could last longer, or some requirements might be bigger than we expected. That's where assessment comes in. And anytime you approve consensus, you go back and you check, is it working? Should it be working? If it's not, then you go back and Google check for the requirements, and then you go back to the assessment part and you iterate. This is the iteration basically charts. And the requirements lifecycle management knowledge area includes the following tasks. So the area that we're going to discuss requires the following tasks, these are going to be the next five chapters, right? Exactly. Like this is going to trace requirements is going to be a chapter, maintain requirements is a chapter, prioritize requirements is a chapter, assess requirements changes is a chapter, approve requirements is a chapter. Now, listen, there's something about this. Eh? All right. So trace requirements, analyzes and maintains. Keep in mind, every one of these is a document. So this is the title of the document. This is not an action. This is the title of a document, right? Like I would want to write something here, for example. I'm sure I can do this here on here. Each one of the chapters is a document. Title of name. Wait, all right, whatever. Thought. Just in case you guys are like, what the fuck's going on here? I am trying to understand how to think about this. That's practically it. That's practically it. As I write notes, and this is something beautiful because as you kind of like, I wrote a note here. This is the first time I do it. I've gone through like five things. It's mainly because I'm looked at trace requirements as like, are we tracing requirements? Are we creating traceable requirements? I had no idea. But then I was like, no, each one of these chapters is a document to be created. That's why the naming convention is not really like designed to point in a certain direction. It gives us an overboard on something, but it doesn't really like it's not an action. It's a lot of series of actions that are under this whatever's going on. It analyzes and maintains the relationships, trace requirements, analyzes and maintains the relationships between requirements, designs, solution components, and other work products for impact analysis, coverage, and allocation. We'll get to that later, but ultimately, trace requirements is the analysis and the maintenance of the relationships. Okay? Maintain requirements ensures that requirements and designs are accurate and current throughout the life cycle and facilities we use where appropriate. So the maintain requirements documentation, kind of like if I were to do it, I would think of like these are where the requirements started up and this is where we are right now. And ultimately maintaining it is basically going back to the requirement and seeing if it's still relevant, if it needs updating, if there are parts of it that are complete. Prioritize requirements, assesses the value, urgency, and risk association with particular requirements and designs to ensure that analysis and or delivery work is done on the most important ones at any given time. Fucking amazing. So the idea behind it is just like, it's an assessment of which one are we doing now, which one is necessary now, which one maybe you need to do once a week so that after 1 month you actually build a certain model around it. And it's all about frameworks of mind and mental capacity. Assess requirement changes, evaluates new and changing stakeholder requirements to determine if they need stakeholders. They haven't mentioned that in almost a page. To determine if they need to be acted on within the scope of a change. So basically, when there's when the assessment of the again like that's not one. I'm sure all five of these are kind of like if you do anything new with the trace requirements, you have to go through all these four documents. And I'm interested to see how that actually happens in the wild. Like if you have a job and like you're working with the team and something's coming and something's kind of like, there's a change happening and everyone's like, requirements, prioritize, talk to the stakeholders. You'd imagine like everyone on the team's kind of like going somewhere and then coming back on one document that fits all. Kind of reminds me of programming when it comes to how the single thing that changed the programming forever was a guy that created something called Git. Whoever understands what Git is. Git basically allows people to work with each other and contribute to to the same basically code, and it has to be approved by management and all that shit. So it's super fun. Anyways, assessing requirements basically evaluates new and changing stakeholder requirements to determine if they need to be acted on within the scope of a change. Stakeholder requirements or your own requirements. You might actually have requirements on your own to do things. And approving requirements works with stakeholders involved in the governance process, which to reach approval and agreement that requirements and on requirements and designs. So that should remember, very, very important. You are the one making decisions, but your decisions have to basically not be fully your responsibility because you never know. Somebody would be like, I trust you, and then be like, what the fuck? That's not what we wanted. The core concept model and requirements lifecycle management, the business analysis core concept model. The following table describes the usage of application of each of the core concepts within the context of requirements lifecycle. Now, quick, what are the core concepts of business analysis? Change, solution, need, stakeholder. I think there were 8 or 6 or 8. Change, need, solution, stakeholder, value, and context. Core concept is change, the act of transformation in response to a need. Need is a problem or opportunity to be addressed. Solution is specific way satisfying one or more needs in the context. Stakeholder, a group of individual in a relationship to the change, the need of the solution. Value, the worth, importance, or usefulness of something on a stakeholder within the context. And the circumstances is context is the circumstances that are influenced by and provide understanding of the change. So during requirements life cycle, the change has basically is affects. So the core concept of change basically allows us to manage how proposed changes to requirements and designs are evaluated during an initiative. The core concept of need allows us to trace, prioritize, and maintain requirements to ensure that the need is met, right? Because like each one of these core concepts is kind of like a pillar that we kind of like search for in the work that we're doing, and everything around it kind of either fortifies it or points towards change or the solution. Like if it's fortified, it points towards the solution. If it's understood properly, if the need is understood properly, that allows us to trace better, to prioritize better, to maintain better. Solution kind of like leads to tracing requirements and designs solution components to ensure that the solution satisfies the need naturally, because like you can't trace anything if you're not actually like planning on using it in the solution itself. Stakeholder basically gives us the opportunity to work closely with the key stakeholders and maintain understanding, agreement, and approval of requirements and designs. Value, maintain requirements for reuse and extend far value beyond the current initiative. And context, analyze the context of support, tracing, and prioritization activities. Here we are. We got charts, requirements, lifecycle management, input, output diagram. What's the input? Requirements, designs, proposed change, and at 7.2, verified requirements. So at chapter 7, we dive back into the requirements. I think right now is mainly like kind of like setting up. Life cycle management is different than getting requirements, right? Because here in we're at chapter 5. Chapter 7 is requirements analysis and design definition. So basically, we're diving into like actually finding the requirements. Right now, it's how we manage requirements. So it seems like this book is kind of giving us like the outside look. And it's funny because like the words they use and the way this book is written is always explaining to us kind of like the abstraction of it becomes ingrained as we move forward in the chapters. So right now, I have a clear idea of how to manage like trace requirements because we kind of like understood how to manage elicitation and collaboration, right? So it starts with a plan and then what you're getting information with and how are you gonna manage this kind of shit? And how are you gonna assess and how are you gonna approve and how are you gonna prioritize and how are you gonna maintain? So really every chapter is building on top of the previous chapter, but effectively what we're doing is we're starting from a much wider scope from the beginning of the project and like diving into the minute details that will basically show up. And what we're doing is articulating our process step by step in order for us to not necessarily like have any opinion of our own, but completely follow the trail of things that are in front of us. Super impressive, man. It's like I imagine 50 years of people nerding out on this shit. What about tasks? Any input we have here will give an output to task, would create tasks, would bring to us tasks, which are the trace requirements, maintaining requirements, prioritizing requirements, assessing requirements changes, and approving requirements. And then the output that we have is the trace requirements and designs traced, requirements maintained, designs maintained, requirements prioritized, designs prioritized. So basically it gives us two things, the designs and the requirements. Because of the requirements that we get designs, and from the designs we understand better our requirements. So this basically, they seem to be married to the fucking at the hip. But this is fun. This is fun. Yay! 5.1. So we're there. Let's do this. Next chapter is trace requirements. And welcome, guys. How was today's episode? Love it? Hate it? Nobody's watching. Peace.